When you think forward to a world that's easier, more livable and enjoyable, the decisions made today by creative and innovative thinkers will be what has shaped our lives for the better. When it comes to the infrastructure that shapes Aotearoa, we want to create safe and prosperous communities for everyone who calls our country home. From the challenges of large and iconic projects to the less visible yet vital infrastructure that supports how we all live day to day. Our world will continue to change, and together, the future is exciting. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to transform our world into a stronger, happier, and more sustainable place.
There's a few words we've heard used a lot over the last 4 days. COVID probably been the most common, but sustainability must be a pretty close second. There will clearly be an increasing demands on the sector to raise the bar on sustainability and contribute to positive economic outcomes. Not just because of legislation, but because the sector can make some big contributions and it is the right and necessary thing to do. We've assembled a great panel to share their views and later for your questions. So I'd like to introduce Sarah MacCormick. She is an associate planner in the Tamaki Makaurau Environments team at Beca with 9 years experience. Sarah is the people leader for Beca's National Communication and Engagement team. She has held leadership, stakeholder engagement, planning and social impact roles for a range of infrastructure projects across New Zealand. Sarah is passionate about good communications and engagement and its power to deliver impactful societal outcomes. She won't hesitate to speak up on the value this has in fostering buying, building strong and lasting relationships and driving behaviour change. Sarah is most proud of her work with Ngā Mana Whenua or Tamaki Makaurau young people and community groups. Sarah has previously sat on the Mayor's Youth Advisory Panel and Comet Auckland's Board of Trustees. Thank you, Sarah.
Morning, thanks Claire. Tēnā koutou katoa no Aotearoa ahau, kei Tamaki Makaurau tōku kāinga, ko Sarah MacCormick tōku ingoa, haere mai, e hoa mā. Welcome to our fireside chat today on sustainable infrastructure. So as Claire said, my name is Sarah, so I'm a New Zealander, I live in Auckland and I'm a planner at Beca. And I, as Claire said, primarily work in the communications, engagement and social outcomes space. And I'm here today to facilitate this panel. But I'm also here because I love working in infrastructure and as was mentioned before, I'm really passionate about the power of relationship building and having real discussions and truly believing that's what's going to get us to better outcomes for infrastructure. And as was also mentioned, highlights of my career so far have been on some of those large infrastructure projects and the real opportunity that those make in, you know, delivering really great outcomes and big change for communities. So before you hear from our panel members this morning, I think it's important to acknowledge that we're all people, we're family, friends, we're tangata whenua, tau iwi, we're your colleagues, and we work alongside you in this infrastructure space. And so why are we here as a panel today? Well, simply, we're having a conversation. I referred to that earlier as a fireside chat, which to us seemed like a really fitting format. So this morning you'll hear a bit of back and forth from all of us on this panel. Ultimately, we're trying to continue the dialogue that we have started as colleagues about what it means to truly deliver sustainable infrastructure, because at the end of the day, we are hopefully a representation of the people down on the ground doing that work. And I guess this is about bringing a lot of that discussion out to the open and doing that in sort of a more candid, open, honest way. And acknowledge that we are all on a different journey, but a bit of a glimpse this morning into hopefully that journey we are on and what that means in our day-to-day. So what's in it for me, you may be asking? Well, hopefully you all see parts of yourselves in the panel before you and the benefits of thinking as a collective. It's our hope that today's conversation prompts you to start to have similar dialogues in your own organizations with your clients, your colleagues, and your partners. So with that in mind, it'd be great if you could interact with the Q&A. I'll keep an eye on that and hopefully weave that into our discussion this morning, and we'll see how it goes. So again, just to reiterate the journey we're on, I guess it is long, but checking in like this, what we're going to do this morning, I think acknowledges those challenges and helps to identify solutions and learn together, which is a really powerful way to move forward in this industry. All right, so I am keen now to hear from each of our panelists. So I think if you could just let me know a bit about yourselves and the rest of the audience, what you're passionate about and why we're hearing from you today. So Caroline, can you start us off, please?
Yeah, kia ora koutou. Thank you, Sarah. Ko Caroline tōku ingoa. I'm very honoured to be part of this kōrero today. It's a real privilege to be part of this thought-provoking conference in general. By training, I'm a process engineer, but currently I'm wearing a few different hats within Beca. So in one sense, I support the delivery of multicultural artificial intelligence projects that have a Te Ao Māori focus, and then in another, decarbonisation strategies in the Three Waters sector, and lead Beca's internal carbon handprint project. So I'm passionate about being a connector between engineers, sustainability specialists, digital experts, and people driving Te Ao Māori. I see all of these pillars as a really big part of accelerating the change we need. So by working across projects that touch on these, I hope to be a type of translator and connector. Kia ora.
And John.
Tēnā koutou, morning, kia ora, Sarah. Tēnā koutou katoa. Mihi tuatahi ki te kai karakia, I tuku karakia mā tātou, I tēnei rā, tēnā koe, ko Aotearoa, ko Ruape Tamunga, ko Wanganui Te Awa, ko Te Atio Nui Paparangi Tiwi, nō Ngāti Tūpoho, ko Ngāti Tūpoho Tapu, nō Wanganui au ko Ōtautahi Te Kāinga Nainei, ko John Ahau. Just a quick acknowledgement to the kai karakia this morning for the event. Just acknowledging that for us and opening that space for this conversation, I think is really awesome, and all our conversations to share in these narratives. It's a really important discussion, I think, and really important for us to share that openly with the industry. My name is John. I was born in Wanganui and currently live in Ōtautahi, Christchurch. So speaking from Christchurch today, and I'm the Māori Business Advisory Lead for Māori Services for Beca. Sit within a team of Māori across Beca, across the motu, and I guess what really excites me and really challenges me and is effectively what the title of our presentation, effectively, ka mua ka muri. Looking back to walk forward. It's not about looking backward. It's looking back to those gifts that our ancestors give us and share with us and express within mātauranga, within Te Ao Māori that actually help us plot a chart forward. So I just get really fired up, really excited about those opportunities to elevate mātauranga. We'll talk about that later, and partner with Māori and outcomes that we can seek together as a nation. So yeah, kia ora.
Kia ora, John. Kia ora, Caroline. Connon.
Yeah, kia ora toto. Called Connon Andrews, toko ingoa. Hi, I'm Connon, and I am Beca's Market Director for Coastal Adaptation and Resilience. And look, I'm pretty passionate about climate change, and I'm going to be sort of trying to provide that angle for this conversation. Why am I interested in climate change? Well, it is as I mentioned, it's my passion, and it's one of the things that really drives me in my career to date, over 25 years now. And I'm really keen to position our future generations, that includes my kids and hopefully their kids, to live in an environment that's in a much better situation than what it is today. And I'm really conscious that we make good decisions now to put those future generations in good stead. My journey is interesting. I've worked globally, and also I do a lot of work through developing nations, and have a long track record working with development banks, and keen to provide a bit of insight from that journey, because they do bring the sustainability goals to the forefront, and all those projects, and climate change is central to the project development and implementation. So looking forward to give my climate change lens on this conversation.
Kia ora, Connon. I'm keen to actually stay with you if we can. So just to kick off our chat, just around sort of the context that we're in, I think that's important, just to acknowledge where we're at in the sustainable infrastructure journey, and probably maybe more the sort of climate change and the urgency side of things. Connon, if you want to sort of kick us off with that kōrero, please.
Sure. Well, climate change, of course, is topical. We've heard about it this morning. But look, we've just finished COP26, and I think it's really important to push pause and look at where we are in this journey. The one thing that's come out of COP26 and all the supporting studies that have been going on to support that is that we have actually now reached the time for action. We have to stop talking. This is the decade of action. And so that sense of urgency has always been urgent, but now we have actually reached that point where it is, we have to do something. And the challenge with climate change is that the future is uncertain, because we actually don't know what pathway we're going to be on, because our future is going to be dictated by future decisions. And so that makes the whole subject about sustainable infrastructure development, when you consider climate change, a bit more complex. Throwing on top of that layer is that there is a lot of pressure now for intensification and really putting our infrastructure under stress. And at the moment, our current planning regime doesn't really help us identifying where to put appropriate infrastructure for when you consider a much longer term. And so there is a bit of a growing tension there about intensification and where to do it, and making sure that it's done in the right way. But the other thing out of COP was that it's quite clear that we have to really make some drastic changes about how we live, and how we particularly make decisions. And what's clear is that the way we've made decisions in the past is definitely not fit for purpose for making decisions going forward. And so we do need to have some very courageous leadership in this decade to actually make some good decisions about our future of our infrastructure.
Awesome, thanks, Connon. John, have you got anything in terms of that, just into this context that we're sitting in, those problems, and a bit of that urgency, maybe?
Yeah, I think, just picking up on Connon's points just now, around, or broadly speaking, urgency and looking to things in the past that, or up until date, that might not necessarily have worked. In that urgency space, our communities are at risk. We do live on the periphery of the ocean in Aotearoa. A lot of us, our communities are at risk from our people's perspective. Our marae are at risk a lot, sitting literally on sea level. Our whenua is telling us some things that some things aren't quite in balance, and to me that speaks immediately to what Connon was mentioning around, what can we look to in our past that might enhance or change the way that we do things. And I really think that that's worthwhile discussion, acknowledging that it's a big challenge, and it's a big challenge for everybody. I'm not 100% sure that we are fully harnessing the information and knowledge mātauranga, etc., that could enhance what we might do, or how we might react, or how we might change things up and really hit our straps around this challenge. Yeah.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I'm keen to talk more about that, about Mātauranga Te Ao Māori. There's been a great question come through in the chat, hot off the press. So how well in the infrastructure and public sectors have we actually embraced that need to build differently? I guess we've got this generally shared understanding of the urgency and the problem. Are we doing that? Are we embracing the need for that now?
I've got a comment on that, actually. I think that there's an undeniable, in some parts of our society anyway, at least, an undeniable sort of kind of rising up of Te Ao Māori in society. You know, I'm not saying that it's everywhere. I think that in some sectors, and probably the sectors that we work in, we see it a lot. You know, some strong government leadership, some strong society change, etc. But the question is, you know, are we doing enough? Or is there enough change? I think to me, it feels like we're just at the start line, and you know, the urgency thing means that we can't dwell on the start line for too long, and you know, there's an opportunity right now for us to just to think differently, and we're coming along, but yeah.
I agree with John on that one, Sarah. The other challenge I think we've got is that from a climate change perspective, I'll keep reverting back to that, but I still feel that there's a level of education. I mean, I'm quite surprised about the relatively low level of knowledge about the causes of climate change and the effects and how you manage it. And so I think that there is a lot of work has to be done into education and actually understanding it. We've managed to make a fairly, it is a complex subject, climate change, but we actually made it into a complex subject, so people just don't really understand. And that's actually leading to some poor decisions, denial, and just because people don't understand, like the thought that we can engineer our way out of this. We can't. In some forms we can, but we can't. So I think we are on a journey, as John mentioned, but a big challenge for us is overcoming this education piece, and then of course having a good toolkit, legislative, to help us make those decisions, which of course has been developed at the moment through the RMA reforms.
Sorry, Sarah, I just had a thought there, just bouncing off Connon's thoughts too, and just thinking out loud. Is that change that we can experience, or is that a different way of thinking? Looking through Te Ao Māori, to Te Ao Māori, and enhancing that knowledge, or enhancing that getting a wider view, a bigger view, of not only the challenges but how we might address those challenges. And the word adaptation springs to mind, Connon. And we might sort of go there in this corridor. I think, when is the time to accept that when putting our effort into getting the climate fixed, almost like back to whenever the Shangri-La of climate balance existed, if there's ever such a thing. When do we find the need to stop doing that and putting our efforts into how to adapt to what we're being dealt? I think that's an interesting conversation too. I think of the concept of te taiao, or not the concept, the Māori view of the environment. It's actually all of us. We're integrated with it. Water's integrated with it. Whenua, why, climate, all living things. It's all integrated. So it's all we have to adapt within that. And that just sprang to mind. So.
Oh, John, no, great subject. You just hit my one of my passion points. Adaptation is key, and I guess the one of the things that have become obvious is that as a society we've been really focusing a lot on mitigation. You always hear about emission reductions and carbon reductions, etc. That's great, but the reality is that how I mentioned at the start that we have a range of outcomes and pathways in the future where we can go. But the reality is that regardless of that pathway, there is certain impacts on our climate that are going to happen regardless. And one of them is particularly sea level rise. And that has has an enormous effect on New Zealand, because a lot of our communities are living in low-lying areas. And so regardless of the future, sea level rise is going to keep going for centuries and millennia. It's just the nature of the process, because it's just a slow-moving lag indicator of climate change. And so with that is that we do need to move from the conversation of mitigation to incorporate adaptation definitely in our decision making. And again, when I talked about urgency, is that, well, we've already had sea level rise has already gone up to 200 mil since the start of last century. So it's happening now. We have to accommodate it now, and so the time to start accommodating it is now. And more importantly, we actually have to take a much longer time view of the world, 100 years, etc., and start wondering what is the potential liability that we are going to give future generations to where we put infrastructure in those areas that are subject to natural hazards and risk that can be exacerbated by climate change. So all I can say in summary in adaptation is, well, the timing for adaptation is now, and we have to start thinking about it.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, I guess we've talked a bit about the urgency and those drivers being climate change that's sort of looming on us as industry professionals. And I guess Claire mentioned this in her introduction about COVID being mentioned a few times, and I'm not surprised at that. It's sort of front and center, and to me, there's sort of a comparison you could almost draw between our COVID response and climate change. And yeah, I was sort of reflecting on that sort of context around, in climate change we have a generally well understood science, although you're talking about education and things, Connon, in terms of barriers, and same with COVID. We had a similar sort of well understood science general context, but the way we acted was very different. Different countries really handled that differently, and I'm sure there's some very obvious barriers or reasons why. So I guess I'm really keen now to hear and sort of tease out a bit more what some of those barriers and challenges we're facing to actually start off and get acting. Caroline, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I do find it quite fascinating the way we have responded so well to COVID, considering that climate change is equally termed a crisis. And maybe it's about this fact that whether things are, whether they're short-term or long-term crises, and maybe it's about that we struggle to address these chronic, more long-term crises because, and we have talked about this a bit, because and Connon actually raised this point to me, we actually are quite fight or flight. We still have a lot of that caveman brain in us, and we can only maybe really see a few steps in front of us. And I just find it quite fascinating thinking about the personal sacrifices we were prepared to make for COVID, salary cuts, delaying a promotion, a drastic shift in life cycles. And I wonder if we can do the same for climate change. Can we our BAU lifestyle? Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess of COVID is that it has contributed to our resilience as people, I feel, and it's given us that insight into the fact that we can do different things differently if we need to, and which we probably will have to for climate change's sake.
Yeah, Carolyn, I completely agree, and I guess that the issue we've always had with climate change is that it's such a slow-moving thing with the momentum that it's just hard to feel the pain from that. And I completely agree with you there. The challenge, of course, with trying to manage that risk going forward is that. The idea of how the size of the issue is lost. And so if we think that COVID is bad, I can tell you that the effects of future climate change on the way we live is going to be much more significant, and it's going to require a much more drastic change to the way we live and how we make decisions to actually to navigate this pathway. So the adaptive decisions we have to make for our infrastructure are going to be significant, and it's going to affect every facet of our lifestyles. And I just come back to the urgency thing again, is that this urgency needs to happen in this decade. And so it's something we actually need to think about now, and rather than push it down the road for future generations.
It's a bit, I was thinking about barriers myself actually, and just now around what other barriers exist, and where's that dichotomy that exists around that concept that we think that the impacts of climate change are a long way away. They're always in the future. They're for somebody else to look after. Does that factor into some of the barriers? I'm not really sure. Maybe less so as we come to grips with the knowledge around what's happening in climate change. I bring it back to I bring it back to that knowledge. I like to bring it back to that knowledge, and it's a barrier, but it's also an opportunity to embrace alternative sources of knowledge, alternative worldviews that might help tell us, or might help us chart a path forward in this decade. I like the aspect of it sounds like a bit of a contradiction, but I like the Māori worldview about it's about our children and our children's children. You might say, Connon, and rightly say, what I'm doing is I'm kicking the problem down the road a bit further. But actually, what that means is we do stuff right now that's going to benefit our children and our children's children. It's our responsibility because we're upholding the mana of the future. That's whakapapa, right? Is that a barrier? Does that present as a barrier? Is that we're only really seeing things to benefit our lifetime as well, or not even our lifetime, our 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year plans? I wonder about that.
Certainly, John. I feel like that's actually one of the best things we can learn from a Te Ao Māori worldview, is that real intergenerational thinking, like hence the concept of kaitiakitanga. And maybe, when we can actually use that long-term thinking, we can better prepare ourselves from both a financial and a environmental point of view as well. I think there was a really good point Professor Nicholas Shadbolt brought up today about trees, because right now we're planting a lot of, for example, Pinus radiata to help with our climate offsets. But what she was explaining is, at some point, if these trees have a short-term life, we're actually going to be back at square one when they all get chopped down in a certain number of years. So if we can look for more intergenerational solutions, such as native reforestation, then that will, solutions that will actually stand the test of time and improve our biodiversity at the same time.
You've actually introduced this really awesome. This is a bit that really fires me too. Is this particular conference and other conferences and what we do in everyday lives and things like that. We are starting to see businesses adopting values that have a Te Ao Māori sort of aspect. Kaitiakitanga, you raised it there. That's and a whole bunch of others, which I fully think that's awesome. I think to enhance that. And might be also a barrier to enhance that adoption of the values. Putting those values into action, is really key. So bringing the results of those values to the decision-making table is really cool, and that's the ka muri thing, and I share this story quite a lot. A good example is looking to our ancestors and looking to our place names and looking to the reo embedded in society is telling us some things that we can bring to the decision-making table. Like a good example, taitapu. It might feel like a really trivial example, but taitapu, just south of Christchurch, taitapu means special tide or sacred tide. It actually is telling us that the whenua likes to be flooded from time to time. It likes to be a swamp. The whenua would probably prefer to be a swamp. Couple that with sea level rise, we already, currently right now, it's a special tide, a sacred tide. It happens infrequently. It'll become more and more frequently wanting to be a swamp. I guess my point being is knowing that and embracing that at the decision-making table around infrastructure what does that do to enhance or inform our decisions about what we do with infrastructure in that particular location, as an example? And maybe those are barriers. Maybe there's some barriers there to that stop us from opening ourselves up to those kind of informative kind of things.
Mm.
Yeah, so this is a question that's just popped up in the Q&A as well, and I was keen to ask is really, as industry professionals, and we've actually got to do some of this stuff in our day-to-day and weave it into our, projects and processes we're already working under. Are there any examples or lessons that you can take from where you've actually incorporated Te Ao Māori Matauranga in your projects, and that's made a difference? I guess for me, one that really springs to mind is when I was working on the East-West Link project, and I think we did, that a huge highlight for me was working with mana whenua and incorporate, really it really shaped the project in terms of that feedback, and in partnership with mana whenua. It turned from sort of just a simple transport project into a really enhancing environmental outcomes, cleaning up water bodies, and addressing things like leachate, and it just wasn't part of the remit of the project to start with, and it definitely expanded it. And the question here references, significant impacts. That might be hard to sort of do, but I guess even some of those smaller changes and impacts can be really important. Is there anything that sort of comes to mind, John?
I think there's quite a few examples of projects around the Motu, and I can't think of a specific one in this context, but whoever designed the first earth bund for a wastewater treatment plant water quality sort of treatment probably wasn't really deemed to be a water quality treatment aspect at the time. It was more deemed to be returning the Māori to the water on its journey, its hiding into the ocean through awa or whatever. Actually, to be honest, it was probably done to reach some initially done to reach some degree of compliance with Te Tiriti Waitangi, or with RMA, or through onto Te Tiriti Waitangi. But actually, the water quality outcomes for that water downstream of that return, running the water through Papatūānuku, had a really beneficial water quality outcome. It was a bona fide water treatment outcome that adds to the opportunities, adds to the sort of the toolbox of water quality tools. And it wasn't a mechanical trickling filter or anything like that. It was Papatūānuku doing that for us. That's a really good example, I think. There's a number of them that we're starting to see that actually illustrate to me that the opening our doors to alternative worldviews also reaches the outcomes that we all desire.
Yeah, John, I could probably chip in from a Pacific perspective. I've done oodles of projects with development banks and throughout the Pacific Islands, and fundamental to those projects is, or a lot of the projects are infrastructure projects and bridges, for example. But instead of designing a bridge project, it gets redefined to actually connecting communities rather than being a bridge project. And so it's how you redefine it. The other aspect to these from the Pacific and these development banks funded projects is that community decisions and partnership are at the heart of the project in itself, because it's very apparent that to actually get the best outcome, and you need wide community acceptance for those projects to be fruitful and meet the ultimate outcomes. And so I said that's fundamental to good project delivery. I also see it's fundamental to how we address this massive adaptation issue to climate change again in throughout New Zealand. And so community at the heart of this decision making is key.
Are we good at that? And we kind of know that we need to do it, but in practice, do we fall short generally, or are we getting there? Maybe more of a rhetorical question. But
From my perspective, I think we're on a journey. Have we got a long way to go? Yes. We need to make some big steps. I mean, my passion in this area is that I do think there's a huge opportunity to connect the Western worldview to Te Ao Māori worldview. I love the Te Ao Māori worldview because it puts the environment at the centre of decisions, and it actually helps empower good decision making based on cost, but more importantly, environmental, social, and cultural, the full well-beings. Yeah, we've got a way to go.
Yeah, I like that, because I guess that's helped us sort of set up. We're in this context, and I guess where we've come together as colleagues in this kōrero is, acknowledging that we are working in a certain system with certain world, which I think is really powerful in order for us to sort of, recognise this and move forward and hope, bring in other ways of doing things, like Te Ao Māori Matauranga, and elevate that. Before we kind of also continue that discussion, Caroline, keen to hear about your journey on this and some of the highlights. I think you mentioned before you're working on sort of a tool in-house, and in particular developing a Te Reo Māori version with John. Do you want to give us any insights into that?
Yeah, cool. So John and I've been fortunate enough to work with John under his leadership for a Te Reo Māori version of our Frankly AI, a community consultant, essentially a virtual community consultant at this stage, but it takes a lot of forms. But I think, kind of linking back to what we're saying around the barriers to maybe engagement or understanding alternative worldviews, just from my experience working through this project, is we've been trying to deliver a multicultural version, like not just multilingual, but multicultural equivalent of our English chatbots. So we've been working with a Te Reo Māori expert, and she's made me realise that there's so many layers that can actually cause information and things to get lost in translation. So firstly, there's words that just they don't have direct transliterations between English and Te Reo Māori. And then on top of that, the sentence structures and the way we have a conversation doesn't embody a Māori worldview. And then beyond that, she's actually really helping us rethink the design principles for this chatbot. So, what personality does this chatbot have? What values and what tikanga does it hold? So I think this has really made me think about the general engagement process, and how, these important concepts and thoughts could get lost in translation. Keen to hear your thoughts on this too, John.
Well, firstly, I think you're being very generous. So to my role in there, so kia ora. It's just really exciting to be on that journey too, with the chatbot and just seeing where it goes. What I really like about it, and we talk about this heaps, is it's about actually just no voice left behind is the thing that goes with it, and that to me illustrates exactly what we're talking about, Connon, Caroline, Sarah, through this is that actually it's an opportunity to and it's one vehicle to open up that knowledge, open ourselves up to that knowledge, to that different way of viewing the world, that dare I say it, I might get in trouble, that more harmonistic connection to Te Ao, to the environment, with the environment. I think it's a with as opposed to. We are part of it. We're part of Te Ao, and that to me is one of the sort of like almost like secrets to uncovering what the next decade might look like in this urgency space around infrastructure, around how we might apply things differently or design things differently, and leaving no voice behind is one of the opportunities, one of the tools that supports that kaupapa.
Just on that, the barriers, I think it is worthy to note that RMA, the Resource Management Act, by design, sort of is was intended to capture the, future generations, the Te Māori view of the world. So it's and in itself is actually quite a good, strong piece of guidance. And then you overlay it with other pieces of existing legislation, such as the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. That's provided some good guidance, but unfortunately, over time, some of those themes have been lost, and it hasn't really been translated to strategic planning. And I guess what's happened is that, with the new RMA reforms that's been planned, is to try and improve some of these governance issues and overcome some of these barriers. But it's going to take time. But the good news, I think, is that while you can point to our existing legislation and policies and plans and say they're barriers, there's actually a lot in them that we can actually use now to achieve and make better decisions. So, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement that can actually would say you should avoid developing in areas that are prone to natural hazards. Avoid, but for some reason in our regional district plans we seem to be focusing on mitigate and then developing engineering solutions. But there is a lot of guidance there and a lot of vehicles within existing legislation that we can use now. And I guess my encouragement is, yes, that's considered a barrier at the moment, but I'd encourage people to say, well, actually, let's use our current toolkit as best we can to try and make better decisions now. Let's not wait for this new legislation to start this journey of making better sustainable decisions.
Connon, just highlighting, there's a really good question in the Q&A about you mentioned this toolkit, which I think is really great. We like to hang on to what is going to help us drive those outcomes, and I think we rely a bit on things like district plans to spell out to us. Is it as simple as just those, for example, the district plans spelling things out, or is it is it wider than that? Is it behavior change? Is it ways of working, culture?
Look. There's yes. The answer is yes to all those. But if you look back to legislation and policies and plans, I think the key is that we do need regionally. We have to look at the regional policy statements and just retest them, and to make sure that they're actually honestly reflecting some of the overarching guidance, particularly from the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. I keep reverting back to that because I do see that the biggest issue to New Zealand is sea level rise and from future climate change, and that does affect it's was it $14 billion worth of infrastructure at risk, public infrastructure at risk. So it is a big issue, and then you filter and through the regional policy statement that basically directs the regional and district plans. And so and ultimately I do see that there's opportunities to actually step back and try and make some more regional decisions rather than just by parcel approach, which is where we are at the moment. We seem to be looking into little parcels rather than stepping back and saying, let's try and get a more alignment with the Building Act and try and make better regional decisions about where we should be building or not for the longer term. So the short answer to your question was yes.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's also some other great questions, but I guess, John, we talked a bit about the existing context we're in, some of the barriers and challenges. If we move through into sort of a solutions focus, which we all love as delivery people, what's the opportunity here? How do we, I think you mentioned it before, sort of elevate Matauranga in our ways of doing things?
The opportunity, like the word that comes up a lot, and I think we're grappling with what the definition of it is partnership, and particularly within Te Tiriti Waitangi, partnership, cornerstone value, cornerstone component of that. I think we really struggle to define what that means, but we also really struggle to operate in that space of partnership, because partnership means giving some stuff away, as it were, giving away control. I suppose I'm going to get in real trouble from the audience here. But to me, partnership is actually about the kōrero. It's actually about sitting down and it's taking the time to understand people's, Māori in particular, the mamae that goes with our history, our past 200 years. It's to sit down and understand what fires, what drives people, what's important. You'd be pretty surprised about what you might hear in a really positive way about those drivers, because in my experience, a lot of the drivers for environmental care are actually looking to the same outcomes, just lensed a different way, told a different way, codified. Let's stop. I'm going to get on my soapbox for a second here. Let's stop calling things Māori myths and legends, because actually that's codified knowledge. So elevating mātauranga is elevating the mana of that to the same level as on the decision-making table to enhance those decisions and to enhance those outcomes. So to me, that's what it's all about. Mātauranga is about mana. It's about recognising people have mātauranga. They carry it. They have the mana to do so. They have that mana to choose whether they want to share that or not. Mātauranga is not for sale. Mātauranga is not as broad, it's complex. There's probably PhDs available in it for what I know. I don't know. I just scratched the surface of it, but understand that there are some key bits in there, codified knowledge, that it will enhance the way that we think about infrastructure in the context of climate change. So
And just chipping in onto that, John, I think that just to hark back to my experience through the developing nations is that successful project delivery and successful change, implementing change, is a community-led, which is actually a partnership approach, and you end up having much better decisions and much more buy-in, and so to be honest, there's a reason why most of those successful proposed models for adaptation going forward are all community and partnership based.
What springs to mind too, just immediately before I forget about it, is I get challenged about this all the time, because on one lens you might say partnership is about bringing half of the information to the decision-making table. If you're a company like ours, or an infrastructure industry, being comfortable with only bringing half to the decision-making table, half the information, half the knowledge. I think we're quite used to thinking that we need to bring the whole lot, but we actually don't. And then other people challenge me and say, actually, you only need to bring 30%. Your partner will bring the other 30%, and in the middle is the beautiful hunting ground, or the happy middle ground, where those two contributions come together into solution space. That's pretty cool stuff to think about what that might mean. And we are starting to experience that in co-design and all those sorts of terms associated with that are creeping in, which is really cool.
Cool. That's really cool, John.
Caroline, you probably have a thought, but I'm interested to hear from you in terms of, say what you want to say there, but working with someone like John and helping to navigate some of the work you've done with Frankly, as well as, juggling other bits, deliverables you're doing in your own work. How helpful has that been to have someone helping you navigate?
Yeah, no, certainly. Cool. I'll just quickly leverage off your point before, John, about that percentage in the middle, and it's something I've been learning about, become quite passionate about recently, is listening. And I feel like, unfortunately, we don't really value listening in the same way we value speaking. Imagine even in this conference, if we were giving recognition to our best listeners, like how, these people asking the Q&As, who are these people? They're listening so well, but we don't elevate them in the same way. And I wonder if, the more we become better listeners and really try and understand where people are coming from, the more we can get that magic in the middle, John, where we're coming together. So, that's just a little side point. But yes, certainly, Sarah, I've found, John is someone who can see both worldviews. Te ao Pākehā and Te ao Māori has been really valuable for navigating our work, particularly, and frankly, we're really grappling with this concept around Māori data sovereignty. It's a hot topic. I'm sure many people on this call are also grappling with it. And what we're finding is, with John's guidance, it's more about, we're not going to, it doesn't need to be perfect. We're not going to, get it fully locked in. This isn't how it is, but it's more about being iterative and agile and making sure that it's flexible and open to, the more we have discussions with different groups of iwi, then we can get their feedback and build it up rather than it being sort of set in stone at one point in time. So yeah, that's just an example of how it's been really helpful.
Connon, I was just thinking this is definitely in your wheelhouse because you brought it up, the urgency, let's do things in this decade. What we're talking about over the last sort of 15, 20, 30 minutes kind of might present as a challenge to pausing and slowing things down. Partnership takes time to develop. You're not going to get partnership overnight, particularly in the Crown to iwi space or the Te Waitangi space. There's lots to unpick. Thoughts around. I think we need to acknowledge that slowing down can be a good thing. Just to pause and reflect around what we've been talking about too as an industry. The challenge is to do that in the context of this urgency.
Yes.
I wonder. That was what I was thinking. Like I would hope that in that journey around, let's stop calling it a journey, because the journey actually implies that it's going to take some time. But speeding that journey up, putting the accelerator on it, putting the accelerator on partnership and things like that. That might mean that we have to just give away stuff really quickly. I don't know.
And I think we're probably at that point, John, that it comes back to we actually have to start acting now on things rather than actually talking. And if it's about trying to develop real partnership, well, we actually have to get to develop that quite quickly. And it does appreciate, relationships take a while to develop, but we can just change the way that we start thinking about projects and knowledge and how we make decisions. We can adopt different models quite quickly. I mean, at the moment, the whole dynamic adaptive pathways approach is being rolled out as a new way for us to plan to manage climate change in the future. And that's all hinged on making short-term decisions, but having open pathways for the long term. And having those pathways agreed, so you can jump between different pathways. The good news is about, for adaptation, is that we do have a little bit of time. And so we can work on relationships and partnership, but we do have to quite quickly get to the short term and make sure that we are making some good decisions that are really founded on, to go back to the whole cost, environment, social and cultural perspectives, which is Te Ao Māori worldview, will give us much better outcomes going forward. So unfortunately, I hear you, John, about relationships take time. The other thing is that the clock is ticking and we actually have to respond now. And to give you an idea, we do actually have to start implementing and making decisions now, this decade, i.e. within the next 5 years, to actually start addressing the effects of climate change.
Yeah, and I guess there's a great, it's more of a comment probably in the Q&A. So John, it was just reflecting on what you were saying before, and that's why some people find it hard to collaborate. And it's surprising how often when we listen, both parties' objectives can often be achieved. So infrastructure is about and for people. So how we feel about it is also important, and that lends itself really nicely, Caroline, to what you were saying too.
Also, just to note, I've been involved with several projects and naively didn't really appreciate some of the basic Te Ao Māori principles in engineering design. And you charge off and you develop something that is incompatible with Te Ao Māori view, and you go, and so once we understand those values much more and incorporate it into it, it tends to end up leaving a much more environmental friendly and equitable outcome for all. So there's a lot of value in just fast tracking this partnership and understanding what's important. And it comes back down to this whole thing of education I mentioned before. I still think our level of education about climate change, Te Ao Māori worldview, is still very low, and we've got a journey to really turn the heat up on that, and so we can incorporate it more into our decisions.
For people sort of early on in their journey, so recognizing there's some people doing incredible stuff in this space, is it as simple as getting your cultural competency up to scratch? Is that a good start? Caroline, John?
I guess to add to that, I think, yeah, some things I've been learning about that whole issue of concepts lost in translation. I have very limited experience in engagement, but I feel like that could be a big part of the solution, is improving our cultural competency so that we can connect better and actually be able to avoid the concepts getting lost in translation.
I think it's absolutely, it's a bit of a no-brainer around cultural competency. But actually to respectfully use that knowledge is the key bit, right?
Yeah.
Like let's be 100% put that out the front. Te Ao Māori is not for sale. Like I said before, Mātauranga is not for sale. How you respectfully use that is really important for everybody's outcomes. So if it's joint outcomes in mind, then I think that's a good place to start too. I think that let our partners, our Māori partners, tell us what we need to learn. I think, what springs to mind immediately is Te Arawhiti, the framework through whangamorangi and the 6 competencies that Māori have said that you need to know. Call us by our proper names, pronounce our names right, understand what our names mean, understand what our place names mean, understand what you need to do to engage in that partnership to the level that you need to in the context of being the Crown. We need to listen to that more, I reckon. Yeah. But yes, absolutely. Cultural competency is important. It's part of being a partner. It's part of being a Kiwi.
So you've got another question in here, which is great. So in her talk this morning, Professor Shadbolt, I think a couple of us may have listened to that too, challenged us to determine what we as individuals can do to make a positive difference. And I think that lends itself quite nicely to what we're trying to do, which is, as people, at the coalface of delivery, what are some things we can be doing? This person's asking, how has the engineering fraternity evolved / is evolving to do its part? I think we touched on this in terms of that being that journey, and we're on that journey, Connon.
I can give a few examples, and I think that's probably what that question was looking for. But the engineering community is actively, when it comes to sustainable infrastructure, of course, we are in the journey of trying to develop low carbon solutions for our development. So we are looking to use less concrete and swap out products and developing a lower carbon footprint. So we're actively using that approach in our projects and by design. More importantly, we're helping our clients ask the decision right at the start. Do you need that piece of infrastructure? And can it be done in a way that's much more efficient? So to eliminate that carbon footprint more importantly, that CapEx and OpEx cost going forward. And then also in the the future space about how to plan for existing infrastructure. And we are as an industry are supporting our clients and councils as well tackle those big decisions and working with communities about how to redesign the community going forward. And in helping them make some decisions about how to manage infrastructure, and this is going to go down. I mean, we're going to see it more and more in the future about managed retreat and moving infrastructure, and then tackling the the issues about who pays. And so the engineering industry is quite well advanced in this space. We understand the issues. It's now, we do need greater buy-in or understanding from the community about why we have to make these changes. And I guess it's a real area for courageous leadership by us individually, as I think you mentioned. This is an individual thing, but it's also a community thing that we need to do to tackle this enormous challenge we've got ahead of us of what do we do with our infrastructure with the backdrop of climate change.
Cool. Just one thought to add to that. I think as consultants, I've only lived in a consultant's lens, but we often feel we're at the mercy of the client's decisions, but could be argued to be our ethical responsibility to challenge our clients where possible. So I think part of the individual approach that I take is on those projects, questioning and putting forward other alternative options. Or we've just actually had a massive success with a client organisation where we're really pushing for them to use low carbon concrete just on one project. It felt like a really small step, and then we just got an email back saying that they're going to look to implement the low carbon solution across their entire council portfolio. So it was a small tangible step that you don't really know what flow-on effects that they can have. So definitely start small and start somewhere.
Cool. Okay, I think that might be it really for our questions. There's some really great other questions in the chat, and if only we had enough time to get through this, but I think if I'll try and make sure that they are visible. Maybe they are to everyone. And yeah, just important to keep that kōrero going. There's some really great points in there. So I guess that concludes our panel discussion for this morning. Again, thank you so much for being with us. And I think this is just a sort of, again, this conversation, this fireside chat that we as a group wanted to have. We've been having it, and we wanted to sort of show that more of these discussions need to be had and get these out in the open, and the power of that. And again, this journey is long, and checking in like this and learning together is how we will move forward. So I guess for you in the audience, and I sort of was reflecting on this, if you think kind of 10 years from, not necessarily this moment, but around this time in your career, if you're looking back at your working life, your career, how are you thinking we nailed this sustainable infrastructure? What is something you started doing from this moment that made a difference in that whole piece of moving towards sustainable infrastructure? So that's a good question, I think, or thought to hold in your mind from now on. And just a quick point to say that Beca is looking forward to hosting an event in conjunction with Infrastructure New Zealand. So that's next year, and watch the space for that. But key thing really is bringing the industry together as colleagues, as infrastructure people, to share our commitments. I guess there's been a lot of talk in this conference about that call to action. So what the next steps logically seem an actual sort of commitment to that. So more on that soon, and see you then. Mā te wā. Back to you, Claire.
Great, thank you, Sarah, and thanks to all the panelists there for a really insightful conversation. And again, thank you to Beca for the session, for sponsoring that session. We've got a 60-minute break now, and after the break, we'll have the Honourable Minister Clark speaking about his digital strategy. But before that, we want to play a video from the Infrastructure Sustainability Council around green infrastructure.
About advancing sustainable infrastructure. Infrastructure that is low carbon, resilient, inclusive and adaptive. Infrastructure that is assessed using comprehensive and rigorous metrics. That are third-party verified and aligned with the UN SDG and Living Standards frameworks. With products for all stages of the asset life cycle, from policy through planning, procurement, and into delivery and operation. Products for all types of infrastructure. Today, we're talking about just one, green infrastructure. What is green infrastructure? Green infrastructure, also known as living infrastructure, refers to the systems and features of natural landscape elements that provide environmental, economic and social benefits, such as enhanced water and air quality, air cooling, biodiversity and pollination, as well as improved mental health outcomes for the communities they serve. Examples of green infrastructure include water-sensitive urban design features, street trees to reduce surface temperatures and improve pedestrian and active transport networks, green roofs and walls to reduce heat and increase air quality, rainwater harvesting systems, water attenuation through the use of permeable pavements and green spaces, and tree planting and natural features to improve human interaction with the urban form. Green infrastructure is fundamentally different from grey infrastructure because it has the unique inherent capacity to enhance and regenerate natural resources rather than simply minimising the damage to environmental systems. Today, the green infrastructure project we're showcasing is Scotts Point Sustainable Sports Park.
Hobsonville is about 12 kilometres northwest of Auckland, or a very pleasant ferry ride of around about 40 minutes. The area is a very fast growing modern area. Lots of facilities are being put in place for the new residents. There's boardwalks right around the coastline, and of course there's the new Sustainable Sports Park.
It's about pulling together the best approaches for green infrastructure, the most sustainable approaches to the built elements in the park environment. It's about enhancing biodiversity, and it's about connecting people with nature. It's about combining te auranga, Māori design principles, and working closely with iwi and the community. It's about doing something quite unique, and to help us with that journey, we're using the ISCA IS rating tool. This is the first time this tool has been used in a park-based project in New Zealand.
So as you can see behind me, the site's currently in farmland, but what we hope to achieve here is a large-scale sustainable sports park. So there's a mixture of active sport, passive sport and ecological restoration. We've got 3 large full-size football fields, 2 large baseball diamonds with full-size backstops and dugouts. But we're not just catering for the sporting community. There's lots of picnic areas, playgrounds, passive areas, catering for all.
The kakapo of Hobsonville, Epilobium hirtigerum. Because of the presence of this plant, it will now also include this significant area of ecological reserve. We need nature around us as much as it needs us.
We'll be reducing carbon emissions over the entire life cycle, right from the design through to construction and right down to even decommission side of the park. And we're looking at a combination of synthetics and natural turfs, and we're looking to provide the right mix of those such that we can get the hours of play up, and by getting the hours of play up on the asset really utilises the resource, which is sustainable in its own right. The water system of the park integrates best practice stormwater management approaches. It's really integral to the whole core of the project. We're looking at capturing stormwater, we're looking at recycling that stormwater, and we're looking at novel ways where some of these fields are actually irrigating themselves from the bottom up, which saves on water. So occasionally we will need extra water, so we are going to investigate the use of a bore on site. That bore adds a level of resilience to the system and just gives us another aspect to manage that water in a real holistic way. In addition, we're looking at substituting a lot of the materials that go into a sports park. For example, a lot of the sand that goes into a sand carpet field, we're looking to replace that with crushed recycled glass. At its core, the park is a sustainable sports park.
It's really exciting. We hope this will be an exemplar and a model and a flagship project for others to learn from, so we'll share as we go.
He aha te mea nui o te ao. What is the most important thing in the world? He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. Tis people, tis people, tis people.
Scan to find out more about this project and how your project or asset can do more.